yeah. So we moved on again, and we went down. Um, we passed a few more hotels on the way. Then we cut up from the beach onto the main road, which was Front Street, and we walked down and we stopped at a shop, a little dive shop called the Blue Hole and Snorkel Center. And we went in. It wasn't massive. It was just had a TV in the window and showing little videos of diving and sharks and all this type of stuff, and little boat trips and fishing. And it was run and owned by a guy called Chris Alnett. And Chris was ex RAF as well. He had married a local Belizean called Graciela, who was really nice. And Chris had a little girl at the time. She was only a baby, and I don't know who she was. And he introduced me as Cole. Chris said he'd heard a bit about me, shook hands, and Chris he turned out to be quite a nice guy. And I seemed to notice that there were quite a few ex-service people down there, and they just all gelled and stuck together, basically. So Chris said he would catch up. Shook hands with Chris again. Chris, nice to meet you, Cole. Nice to meet you, Chris. And Dave and I exited his shop, and we continued to walk on down. We passed a small, tiny police station, which was about the size of a small bedroom. And it was adjacent to an old basketball court. And there was music coming from a bar that was on the other side, and the sign outside it said Big Daddy's. And it was a big wooden building, and it was all the reggae music and all the local music and stuff. It was pretty cool. Hadn't heard Bob Marley for a long time. It was only fitting that you would hear Bob Marley in the Caribbean. And as we walked down again, there was more shops, loads of little gift shops, loads of people hailing Dave. And Dave suddenly switched from being British to being Creole, and shaking hands with people and introducing me. And I felt like a fucking rock star. Everybody was really nice, really cool. And then we passed another place called Tarzan's, and it was another disco, very popular, and it was run by a British guy called Paul. And Paul was ex-RAF, and Paul was based and lived in Belize for a few years, and he owned Tarzan's, and I was later to become quite decent friends with Paul as well. So we carried on walking down, and then we came to a little place called Fido's Courtyard, which was on the right hand side. We went into Fido's Courtyard. It had a couple of little shops as you went in the entrance, some toilets, and it had a bar, and it was covered with thatch leaves, and loads of tables and chairs, little pizza shops and stuff. I'd looked up on the second floor. There was photography shops, little gift shops, and also there was a stage, and on the stage was a couple of guys singing, a fat guy and a skinny guy, and their names were Barefoot and Skinny, apparently, and they were really good. And again, everybody was hailing Dave, and we sat down, and Dave, started having a couple of rums, Caribbean rums. I stuck to orange, I think it was orange juice, and we just started talking to people, and people were coming up to, oh, you're the guy that owns Dive Dreams. Have you got any dive slots available? And Dave was just fucking taking names down and telling people where he was located. And he must have, in the space of an hour, had about 40 tourists coming up to him and asking him for dives. And Dave's just looking at me and, smiling. He goes, half of them won't come. He goes, but half will. He says, because they'll be too fucking drunk. He says, and I don't let anybody dive who's been drinking. And he just told him, he says, if you come to me, come sober, because you're not becoming, you're not becoming drunk. I don't do that, run that type of business. And fuck, I was amazed. I was amazed at everything, at how everything was, and, how nice people were, and, no swearing, nobody was cussing, nobody was swearing, nobody was spitting, nobody was drunk, nobody was fighting. Nothing. There was nothing like that. It was just an alien planet, to be honest. And of course, all the chicks were coming up to Dave. All the local chicks were coming up and, messing with him and feeling his biceps and, you know, all this type of stuff. And I was just laughing, sitting back laughing. And I was like a kid in a candy shop, honestly. And it was a great night. About an hour later, Sue, Amanda, and a local girl called Sally Jean, a tall Spanish looking girl, came down, and her parents owned Tropic Air. So and her brother was called Johnny Grief, and Johnny came along with Sue, and Johnny looked like he was Chinese, but he was Mayan, half Mayan, half American or something like that. His dad was American, his mom was local. Really nice guy. Johnny was also a pilot, and him and I got talking for a good bit, and Johnny was just nice. And it was a great night. We met loads of people. I didn't really realize that David had arranged for loads of people to meet us down there, and it was introducing me, and the crack was just unreal. It was the first time I seen Dave get absolutely hammered, and he was drunk as fuck. And it was a fantastic night. I had never experienced anything like it in my life. So Dave definitely was going to have a headache the next morning, and he would be eating his own words when he said, "Don't come diving drunk." So we met John, the British guy. He was with some local chick. Stayed with us for a few minutes, and then after about an hour and a half, everybody did a little bomb burst. They just seemed to go off on their own ways, and do their own thing and meet other people and go and speak to other people. David and Sue did it. I was at one point sitting at the table on my own, which is really good because it gave me a breather, and I wasn't used to meeting so many people or talking or just listening to other people's conversations. It was something I wasn't used to at all. And so that breather for me was really good. And then a few minutes later, some American guy called Joe came and plunked himself down at my table. And I didn't know this guy at all, but Joe was the local photographer. He was also a diver. And he just came and he didn't say, "Can I join you?" He just pulls a chair out and sits down. And he just, for 20 or 30 seconds, just stares at me. And he goes, "Oh," he says, "so you're Dave's cousin?" And I said, "Yeah." He didn't offer a handshake or anything as everybody else did. He says, and I goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "I'm Joe," whatever his name was. He says, and he says, "I go diving," he says, on Dave's boats. He goes, "and I do all the photography for him, all the underwater photography and all the underwater movies." He goes, "So you'll be seeing me quite a bit." And I think to which I replied was, "Oh, lucky me." And he'd had a couple of beers in him, so he was I think he was pressing some point for some reason, and I don't know why that reason was. He was just pressing this point across to me, as if, you know, it was supposed to mean something to me. And I says, "Oh, thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled about that. I can't wait." And so I says, I just got up and I says, "Well, nice to meet you." And I got up and I went up to the bar where Dave was. Dave had seen this, and he asked me what was going on. I said, "Oh, he just introduced himself as Joe. Said he was a videographer and he does all your underwater videos and stuff of your divers." And he told me that he'd be seeing a lot of me. And Dave just didn't say nothing. He just kind of looked at me, and then he looked over at Joe, and he just says to me, be careful with him." He says, "Yes," he goes, "he does do my underwater stuff." He goes, he says, "But he says he can be a twat." He says, just be careful of him." And that was it. And that was my introduction to Joe. Apart from that, we had a fantastic night. The music was fantastic. We all left, I think, around about 11:30. I was absolutely ball-bagged. It was going to be an early morning. Dave was absolutely shit-faced. So we ended up getting a taxi home. There was no way Dave was walking. So we ended up getting a taxi back to Dave's place. And then I just tootled on down to my room at the Pirates Lantern. and had a shower and got my head down.